Hello and welcome to Oakville Matters. This is an opportunity to hear about what matters to Oakville in terms of what you've told me and the members of council. And joining me today is a member of council, Jasvinder Sandhu, who is on top of being a member of council for the very northern portion of Oakville, the newest portion. She's also a distinguished lawyer. So you should believe whatever she says over me. Welcome, Jasvinder. It's good to be with you again.
I'm Mayor Burton, and be careful what you wish for, but thanks.
Well, we spent more than 4 hours together yesterday in a virtual council meeting, and you were nothing but wise then. So permit me to generalize from that.
I appreciate it.
Now, one of the things we heard last night, or yesterday late afternoon, was that we're opening our splash pads as fast as we can clean them and obey the province's strict guidelines, which are adding costs to our operations. The little bit that I was going to tee off on here is that we learned that we might have an 18th splash pad that we're acquiring from a new subdivision in your ward. So happy 18th splash pad.
Thank you.
And nature's giving us splash pad like weather today. So, the pressure isn't on today, I suppose. But that's every splash. So 18 is every splash pad in town, and they'll all be up and running in how long? In days, right?
Yeah, in a day. And tomorrow, I think. Or tomorrow? No, not tomorrow. Friday. The 26th was the plan from yesterday's meeting. I think that a lot of the northern families and a lot of families across Oakville will be very excited to have all these splash pads open. I know a lot of people's children are getting fussy being in the house. Now that school's going to be out after this week, it'll be even more beneficial for everyone around here.
Yeah. We'll also be opening 4 swimming pools, 3 outdoor, three of our outdoor pools. I think we have 4, and 1 indoor pool. And that's the newest one that's at Queen Elizabeth Park. And what was it about that pool that we were told? The other pools aren't as good as that one in terms of being able to follow the province's guidelines, and it has an exterior door.
Mm-hmm. And that's the only one that's indoors, right, Rob? Everything else that's going to be opening up is going to be outdoors.
Right, and that takes me back because in the past, there's been, episodic, every 10 years or so, there's been an effort to close the outdoor pools for lack of use. And thanks to COVID, we're about to find out whether people will use outdoor pools more than they used to. Mm-hmm. Maybe they'll get a new lease on life.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know that some of the folks around here, definitely some of the parents of younger children, are worried about guidelines and safety at parks and parkettes and in the pools. Do we have any additional information from the ministry about the safety levels at the splash pads? I know that we wouldn't be opening up if we didn't think they were safe.
Yes, we're following the guidelines from the province and the health district. The way the province is evolving their treatment of the pandemic, there's 34 health districts, and Halton is one of the 34. And the chief medical officer of health of the province is kind of deferring to the local medical officers of health for the local communities. So that's why north of Halton in the county of Wellington, you have a medical officer of health ordering people to wear masks. And I believe also in Windsor, where they're so hard hit, they still aren't able to get into stage 2. But in the other 33 health districts, the medical officers of health have said no, mandatory mask wearing is not necessary because there's been good enough compliance with keeping your distance and wearing a mask when you can't. And our numbers are good. In addition to being, I don't think I did wrong by introducing you as a distinguished lawyer, but you're also a mom of young kids. So you've got like 2 angles on this, and so you're obviously you're as concerned as anybody knows how to be about safety
Absolutely.
of kids.
Absolutely. And I mean, like our youngest is only 7 months. So that's one of the things that we think about on a regular basis. It's not just the kids, potentially getting sick, but maybe even transmitting something and bringing something home to the seniors in our house and also to our youngest child. Because we wouldn't take him to the splash pad. We wouldn't feel comfortable. But our older kids, absolutely. If the town feels like it's comfortable, then I don't see why not. One of the other questions that I get generally across the board a lot as of late is, how come the splash pads are opening but playgrounds aren't?
I have an answer for that. In his wisdom, the Premier has allowed us to open splash pads and not yet allowed us to open playgrounds. And my wife and I, being of an age that's at higher risk for COVID, we tend to consume all the research that gets published on COVID very avidly. And the transmission from objects fear has gone way down, and the evidence for a really active source of transmission from objects, the evidence isn't accumulating there. And so it's fascinating that the province is sticking to its assumptions around there. It's an extra level of caution, if you like, but it has hasn't stopped us from washing our hands more than we ever did in our lives, and it hasn't stopped us from keeping our distance. But it has relieved some of our anxiety to read that kind of research, and I'm hopeful that playgrounds will be released soon. The way the province has set it up, the health districts need to continue to show falling numbers in order to move to the next stages. And so if you want to move, how fast you want to move to the next stage is determined by how well we behave, I think, is clearly that's the way they're treating us.
Makes sense.
Like no allowance unless you do your homework or something like that going on here.
No ice cream unless you finish your dinner.
Yeah.
What about some of the other things that have opened up around town? I know that you were spending some time on the patios when they opened up at 12:01. Was it last week?
At 12:01 Thursday, so a minute after midnight on Thursday night, patio season opened. One patio in Town Square opened just for the ceremonial enjoyment of it. And I and a small group of people went along to celebrate and to help it start. And then during Friday, my wife and I, we tried to visit every one of our newly opened patios. And the day before, on Thursday, I had understood that we had managed to approve 52, but our staff worked so hard in the interval that on Friday we actually opened 60.
That's awesome.
And everywhere, and it's all over town. So Wendy and I went all over town, literally. We went to your ward. You had a patio open, at least one.
Yeah.
And we visited every ward, and the mood was electric happiness.
Oh, absolutely.
Everybody was relieved. I mean, cabin fever, I think, sets in way sooner than 3 months. And I've heard cabin fever starts within 4 to 5 weeks. But so just imagine how everybody felt being let out of the cave, so to speak.
Exactly. That's exactly right. We actually ended up at the fire hall in Bronte. We went down to Bronte Harbor on Father's Day on Sunday and walked over to fire hall, and it was fantastic. We sat down with the kids, had a great bite to eat, and the weather was just perfect. So I highly recommend it to everybody. If you get a chance to get out, sit out on a patio, change your life up a little bit and get out of that cabin fever. It's been great.
The boathouse, which has a patio right on the water, looking at the boats in the outer harbor marina, opened at 4 o'clock on Saturday. And Wendy and I were there for that opening. We were looking forward to a relaxed Father's Day kind of moment together. And, that, of course, is when around 4:30 I became aware of that horrible video of the police officer pushing and shoving the young man, and three other officers appearing to stand around and do nothing. And so there's been, you go from the height to the low. You're happy one moment, and the next moment you're just as angry as you know how to be at all of that, because it's so undisciplined, unprofessional, and it's a direct, blatant contradiction of our policies and standards on the use of force. It may be that the young man was not an angel, but nothing justifies that treatment. Nothing.
Totally.
And, I'm very glad that the police chief suspended the one officer who blatantly betrayed his duty. And I'm actually pretty glad that he's waiting for more information to find out, to decide what to do about the other three, because that video had no audio. And so you don't really know whether they're, being silent. You don't know if they're egging the guy on. You don't know if they're trying to calm him and stop him. And so it's in a time like that that you really want to wait to lead to judgment, I think, if you want to be responsible. So we will wait to see the results.
No, I think you're totally right. It was shocking and disturbing, extremely disappointing, and I think you hit all the nails on the right heads when you talked about how appropriate it is to have the immediate suspension. I think some of the things that a lot of folks don't understand about the law is that sometimes things are set in a certain way, and we have to move within the guidelines and the goalposts of that law. And specifically to things that happen with police, at least in Ontario, the Police Services Act prevents the police and the Halton Regional Police from suspending somebody without pay. That's just how it is right now. There's nothing that Chief Tanner can do to change that. So I think that it's really important that folks understand that, and folks read that statement from Chief Tanner so that they have that additional context as well.
Yeah, I think it was yesterday the Premier was asked about it, and specifically about suspension with pay. And his answer, I thought, signaled where he's going on it, as he said that he'd be glad to sit down with the police associations. There's an association of police unions, and that's what he was referring to. So I don't take that as a signal that he's going to change the Police Services Act, because there was an attempt in the recent revision of the Police Services Act. There was supposed to be some improvement on that front, and when this government came to power, they killed that part of it. So I think the lines on the field have been painted pretty clearly there. Although, most of I don't actually know any police officers who have bad attitudes towards these things. And I think most police officers are right-thinking, great people. And so I'm going to hold out the hope that the Police Service Association will perhaps encourage the Premier to do something. We'll see.
I'm gonna switch gears a little bit, Rob. I know I wanted to touch back on yesterday's meeting again, and where we honored Veronica Tyrell. She was, and I mentioned this yesterday and again on Twitter today, she was a force in the community, and I'm so pleased that we're able to name Buttonbush Parkette after her in my ward. And I know she was a good friend of yours.
Thank you. I really appreciate the very kind and thoughtful motion that you sponsored. And yes, she was a great friend of mine. She died, unfortunately, 2 years ago. But she did have a long and successful life. She built on the work of others. I think it's important to understand that people of color have lived in Oakville since before Oakville was created by the Ontario legislature in 1857. As Oakville was kind of a destination on the famous Underground Railroad, where even before the Civil War, slaves were running away and escaping to Canada in freedom. and Elizabeth Carmichael, to name another woman of color who predated Veronica in terms of her work on this. I heard the mayor of Milton tell a story this morning where 53 years ago, when he first got elected, Elizabeth Carmichael came up to him and introduced herself and said, Mr. Krantz, I'd like you to consider that we might have a racial problem in our community that leaders need to look at. And Gordy, as we all know, Mayor Krantz, has been a very good, stalwart defender of harmony and understanding between races and ethnic groups for all of his career, as we all try to be.
Mm-hmm.
And Elizabeth is now living in one of the regional seniors centers, seniors residences in Oakville. And she's a fountain of wisdom and history. And I think it would be terrific if we could, I haven't asked her yet, but I plan to ask her if she'll let me do like an oral history where you record the memories of a person and put them in the Oakville Museum with the rest of our material on our history.
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic, and a really good piece of knowledge and information for many, many generations of Oakville to come.
So the other thing I thought maybe we might want to talk about is the defunding police demands that I think we all received some of. And I need to set up a little bit of a, like there's contradictory pressures on us as politicians. I hear, I think actually you do too. I hear every day that our residents want more police on speeding and traffic and so on. And anytime there's a break-in, I mean, there was a series of break-ins by a gang from Chile, and our police cracked that. They were looting homes all over the GTA. Our police cracked that case. I remember a public meeting of 400 residents here at Town Hall angrily demanding that we have more police because and the issue then was we have the lowest number of police per capita of any of the Big 12. And we also spend the least per capita on police of any of the Big 12. To give you an idea of what the range is, we spend about $280 per person on police in Halton. And in the city of Toronto, they spend almost twice that. And and then to give you even more context, in Britain, they spend 4 times that. And in New York City, they spend twice what Toronto does, more than twice what Toronto does. So, you know, saying defund all police everywhere without recognizing that police are different everywhere becomes a difficult discussion to have because you kind of want to talk about our circumstances as opposed to somebody else's.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what kind of, have you heard a lot about this stuff?
Yeah, I would say that it comes in fits and spurts. And I also think that there's a key dichotomy here. I think that we have to, our role as public representatives is to ensure that we're listening to the public, but we're also putting that additional lens from our background knowledge and your knowledge, quite frankly, as being chair of the police board, into those same conversations. So speaking as a person of color, there are challenges when you think about how you are perceived in public on a regular basis. That to me has never been a preclusion to anything that I do on a daily basis. Others feel differently. And I think that it's important for us, so this is where I talk about the dichotomy, it's important for us to be able to balance what you just mentioned with understanding how other people are feeling right now. And that's everyone. That could be any race or color. Everyone could be feeling very differently about this.
it's almost a multichotomy, if I can make up a word, rather than a dichotomy. There's only two parts. But when you're sitting as a counselor and hearing from your residents, don't you often hear like 10 different views on things?
Absolutely. And it could change. It could change as a spectrum across different races and communities. I don't think that there is one single position on this, and everyone has their own viewpoint. So I think it's important for us to continue to listen to our residents and understand where they're coming from, and take our own personal experience and try to help as much as we can, whether it's education or information or assistance with whatever it is that they require.
Yeah. Well, I was proud of our council for the official statement against racism that we put out. And I think a very Oakville, and I don't want to read it all, but there's this one statement in the middle of it that I think calls out the essential character of Oakville, where it says, "We believe it takes abiding commitment to living with each other in mutual respect and cooperation to end racism and violence. We have to each be the change that we want," so to speak.
100% agree. And I know that we mentioned in that message that we recognize that not everyone has had the same experience here, but Oakville is still one of the best places to live in Canada. Many people have chosen to live here, even moving from other countries. And we've always found it's a very fantastic place to live. Our family has been in Oakville since 1986. And obviously our people of color are very visible minorities. So it's one of those things that we have to continue to work on. It's never going to be perfect in everyone's mind. I remember, so it's a very loose interpretation of this and a very loose similarity. But I remember when I was getting married over a decade ago, my mom said to me, she's like, you're planning this wedding, you're never going to make everyone happy. And that's kind of how this is too. I feel like we are going to continue to do our best, but I'm not sure if we're going to be able to make everyone happy.
Well, my dad has a expression that he used on us 5 kids whenever we didn't measure up to what he wanted, and it really stung. You'd bring home a report card and you'd have a bad grade, and he'd look at you and he'd go, "Well, I guess it's hard to be perfect." But he did it in such a way as you thought, "Oh, I'm supposed to be." And it was a stress.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And we hold ourselves out in Oakville as the great place to live that we are. And so whenever there's an exception to it, if you've moved here expecting what we've been advertising and you run into a different result, you're going to be shocked, dismayed, and angry. Those are natural feelings, and we get that. The police chief is very good about saying, "We know we're not perfect, but we're committed to being better every day," and I think that goes a long way.
Absolutely. And I think that I speak for all of council, Mayor Burton, when I say this. We're always open to feedback. If anybody ever wants to share their feelings about this, they can absolutely reach out. I know I'd be happy listening, even if it's just over the phone.
Yeah. So I won't see you on a bus probably. I'm just guessing. But if you do see me on a bus, we're going to be wearing our masks, right? Because masks are mandatory, even if we can't quite enforce it, because it's the right thing to do. Here's the cute little mask.
Fantastic.
A friend of mine made one that's heavier, but more fashionable.
Oh, I like that. I wish I had known we were going to be pulling out our masks. I would have brought mine out from, we have a couple of local students from Garth Webb that have been creating masks, and I have a We the North mask.
I saw it. It's 2 hockey players, isn't it?
That's right. From their company's called Viking Supply.
Yeah.
I can share the link. It's fantastic. So I've got, me and my husband have We the North ones, and the girls have Frozen masks with Elsa on them. And then the baby is obviously maskless.
So, I mean, those 2 young men kind of broke some, they shattered some stereotypes for me. You've got two very athletic, high-level hockey players, and they decided that they were going to start a little business to make masks. And they got their grandmother to teach them to sew. And the two boys split up the duties, and you know, I watched their video describing how they do it. And I remember my mother, when I was young, telling me that I had to learn to do my own shirts and, you know, all this kind of stuff. And I said, you know, the obvious stupid thing for a boy to say. And she looked at me and she said, no son of mine is going to be to his future wife like your father is to me.
Hear, 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 hear.
I went, okay.
What a great lesson to teach.
Yeah. Well, my mom, you know, for all that she was born in the 20s and grew up in the Depression era of the 30s, she was a very gutsy woman, and she certainly laid down. My mother never took any guff from anybody.
I love it.
Speaking of sexism and everything.
I love it. Sounds like my kind of lady.
She knew how to stand up and push back, I guess you could say. You know, we only have a minute left, and I don't know if that's enough time to explain why there's more geese in town than usual, but it is one of the hot topics that I hear about. And basically, the best I could do is to say, we've hired summer students on now. We've got people out working on cleanup. The usual gathering of the geese and moving to Aylmer to the geese ranch was unfortunately, because of the pandemic, not possible this year. So the youth of the community who have summer jobs they're our last line of defense. And so watch carefully where you step when you're on the grass. Well, whether you're on the grass or the sidewalk, do watch where you're going. As always, thank you, Jasvinder, for joining me today. And as always, thank you for watching. And mayor@oakville.ca is the email that allows you to tell me what you think and what you'd like us to cover on the show here. And I hope to see you next time.